Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CX Impact podcast by James Heek, now part of Accenture Song. My name is Ivo, and I will be your host for today's episode. Now, the reason we created this podcast is to offer a place for customer insights, customer experience practitioners to share practical advice on how to overcome the biggest challenges they themselves face in the industry. And I think I've got one of the best people for this purpose here with me today. It's a great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Robin Daniels. Robin brings a ton of insights from his experience at companies like Salesforce, LinkedIn, and after spending nearly 15 years in Silicon Valley, he went back to Denmark and is now the Chief Business and Product Officer at Zensai, a learning and development add-on for Microsoft 365. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. No, it's great to be here. Customer experience is something I've been passionate about for a long time. I actually spent over 20 years in California and Silicon Valley. After I bought a one-way ticket from Denmark to California in 2000, I wanted to be with all the nerds of the world. I'm a bit of a nerd myself, and I ended up spending over 20 years there. And there were some things that went okay, some things that didn't work out at all. But luckily, I had a pretty good run. I was early days at Salesforce and at Box, helping them go public, at LinkedIn, then at WeWork, which was a little bit of a disaster. I was most recently at a company called Matterport that we went public with in 2021, so that was fun. And now, I'm the Chief Business and Product Officer over at Zensai, based here in Copenhagen, even though we're a very global company. And we're basically a platform focused on what we call human success, really unlocking the full potential of every single employee so that they can learn, grow, develop, and ultimately become better and better and better every day with the skills that they have to achieve their ultimate goals. So it's very exciting. But I'm excited to be here. Customer experience is something that I'm very passionate about, have been for a very, very long time, because I think that's a real key difference in how you create a super brand.
Thanks a lot, Robin. And I think what you do has a lot of connections actually with customer experience, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the people who are working within the company and kind of developing their own potential allows you to actually create customer experience, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's exactly. It's funny. I mean, it's kind of like the old adage that people often say that everyone's in sales. Well, it's the same actually with customer experience. I think everyone is in customer experience because if the way you treat customers, whether that's indirectly through your product or the way that your humans treat your customers or interact with them, there's so many break points. And so to me, it has to be a holistic experience across all the touch points. Because the moment you start not living up to your word, then of course, that's when customers start losing the trust in you ultimately. So it's really about, I think, thinking about it from the first touch with your brand, your product, your company, or whatever it is, all the way through to you closing a deal, getting support, all this kind of stuff. Right? Every part of it has to be part of a well thought out journey that optimizes for you to fall in love with the company.
It's very good, and I'm gonna use the old cliche. It needs to be holistic, right? You need a whole package for that. At your recent presentation at the B2B CX Nordics event, you discussed using customer centricity to elevate the company's positioning. Can you maybe share a little bit more details on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think basically, based on my experience in leading some of these, I would classify as category leading companies. I think there are three ways you can win a market, three competitive moats. You can either have the greatest product in the world, which is a huge competitive moat. It's obvious, though. You don't really get far, honestly, Ivo, without a great product. So that's an obvious one. The second one is you can have a great business model that it becomes very hard to win against because it's so different. In the early days at Salesforce, for example, we won a lot on our business model because we couldn't win on features versus everybody else. So we won on us having a different business model, software as a service, which I think is very common nowadays. And then the final way you can win a market is I would classify as having the best community, meaning it's kind of the best customers in the world. People who are so much in love with who you are, what you do, what your product does, how it makes them feel, that they will spread the word. They will talk to their friends and family. They'll talk to their colleagues. They'll talk publicly on social media about you, right? And each of these here, I think on their own are massive competitive moats. And of course, the best companies of all, they figured out all three, but it's very hard to figure out three. Each of them, I think, are very powerful, but the last one is really important. And for the last one, this idea of you win through the community itself. But the secret of community building, of building kind of a momentum around you as a brand through the customers, is that it starts internally. And that was my whole thesis, and why I'm working at Zensai, is because we firmly believe that it's really, if you want to win clients and if you want to treat clients well, it starts by winning the hearts of employees and treating your employees well, giving them what they need to be successful. And so one of my favorite entrepreneurs of all time, Richard Branson, I think said it really well. He said, clients do not come first, which is a little, I think, antithetical to how most leaders think. He said, clients do not come first, employees come first. If we take care of employees, then those employees will take care of the clients. And so, of course, they're completely interrelated and connected in so many ways. But for us, it's really about taking care of employees. And it's not just us, but it's about us providing a platform and an environment where companies can really get there. Because at the end of the day, when you see all the data that's out there, I just saw something recently that said 70%, Evo, of employees are disengaged, not happy, not motivated. And do you think those employees are going to show up every day, those 70%, and do the best work of their life? Are they going to have the best interaction with your customers? Are they going to provide a great experience when they're not motivated themselves? Right? And why are they not motivated? When you dig deep into some of the data, nobody's investing in them. Nobody's giving them skills or knowledge. They don't feel like they have any career path to go anywhere. So you've probably been there at some point in your life. I know I have myself, is when you're just kind of like going through the motions, when you don't feel like you're growing personally, you're not learning anything new. And then you start thinking, well, what is this all worth? Yes, I'm making a paycheck, which of course is very important. Don't get me wrong. But a paycheck doesn't provide ultimate motivation at the end of the day for you to become the best version. That's merely for survival in some ways. And so we firmly believe that in order to really unlock this full potential, it's a duty of companies to invest in their employees. Let me ask you, just so we can make this, a conversation. But since you've been at GemSeek and now Accenture, of course, how much has the company done to invest in your growth? I'm curious.
Oh, a ton, and to be honest with you, in sometimes in very subtle ways. So I don't think it's only about, paying for learning and development, paying for me to go to this course or something else. And I think what the biggest thing that actually GemSeek previously and now Accenture Song, of course, has done is allowing me to make mistakes, and in a very supportive and a very trusting way, because I joined like 12 years ago. I didn't know, obviously, a lot of the things that I do know now. I've probably made a lot of mistakes, a ton of things I could have done a little bit better. But the trust was always there. Like, just go and do it, and we were absolutely sure that you are going to learn in a way. No one said that.
Of course.
I think it was very implicit, and I think that's actually the most important bit. Like having the environment in which making mistakes, because learning obviously comes with mistakes, but making mistakes is acceptable as long as you learn from them. And for me, that's kind of the learning culture. That's what I also try to encourage as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've met you a few times now, and I can tell. The fact that you've been there 12 years says a lot about the culture that you have, and the fact that you still maintain your excitement for the future says to me that this is a culture that invests in the growth and opportunity of the employees. Doesn't mean it's perfect every day, and sometimes there are things that could be better and so on. But overall, this obviously affects your motivation, your happiness, the way you show up every day, and so on. And I'm sure that is something that spreads to the other people around you in the company, right? Because I haven't met them, but I'm sure that you're showing up with energy and excitement and passion for the work that you do. And of course, people feed off that versus you coming in every day. Okay, let's just get this done, right? I'm not really excited about it. So it starts by actually having an environment where you can grow, you can learn, you can fail, you can succeed, but also where you have people who are investing in you. I know I'm 100% where I am in my life today because many people have invested in me. Mentors, coaches, parents, colleagues, who have given me the skills or maybe the conversations, sometimes tough conversations, to make me better, right? I'm sure you've had many of those as well. And I
appreciate the gratitude as well that I think we're both kind of showing here, because it's not too easy always to recognize these things, really.
No, but this is what business can be tough. And I mean, I know you used to be at a startup, and now you're in a bigger company, but startup life is especially tough. I mean, there's so many things that go wrong in a startup all the time. Funding doesn't come through, or a product doesn't work for something, or a customer is pissed off, or whatever it can be. So many things, or an employee leaves, But if you have an environment where you're always looking out for each other, supporting each other, helping each other, right? Then there's a sense of belonging. And I think that when I look at some of this data around people being disengaged, I think it comes down to, honestly, a big sense of missing out on the belonging part. But people don't feel like they're part of something. When you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, then you also, of course, will show up with that. You can deal with the bad or the good days. So, for example, there's so many books written about motivation and growth and leadership. And I read a lot of them, so I'm a big fan. But I think actually you can simplify it in many ways to two critical things that absolutely has to be there for you to have the motivation to do great work every day. Number one is, do you have clarity on what it is that you're working towards and why that matters? Like, if you wake up every day fighting for something worth fighting for, that sustains a lot of motivation. That's number one. And number two, do you feel like you're making a difference towards that goal? Mm-hmm. It's hard to stay motivated if you like the goal, but you don't really know if you're making a difference. You've had those weeks, I'm sure, where like, oh my God, I'm so crazy busy, but I don't really know if I achieved anything. I don't know if I made a difference. And so that's kind of what I'm really focused on. Can we do this, of course, first for our Zensai employees, but also for every other company who starts using our platform. And of course, that ties back to coming back to the topic of customer experience, because of course, that will bleed over into the way that you interact with customers. I mean, how many times have you dealt with a cranky airline company, or a telecommunications company where the employee just doesn't seem to care at all, right? And you're like, oh my God, it's just like the most frustrating experience in the world.
No, I love what you're saying, Robin. I think it points perhaps I hear it this way, but really towards change management, really also in a way, because learning and development is change at the end of the day. We are changing by learning. And it, again, linking it with the customer experience topic, but how can you drive this change within the organization? I actually have so many questions. The next question I'm going to ask you, how does change management work with Gen Z and, with younger people and with people of my generation? So how do you start making this change, really? How do you create this culture of learning, if you will, but also how do you create a culture of customer centricity? How do you explain to people that this is something which is important, So many questions, I know.
Great. These are very, very, I think, complex topics. Let's put it that way. Because if it was easy, everybody would do it. Because what I'm saying, what I'm saying is not rocket science in a way. If I say this to most CEOs, and I interact with a lot of CEOs, they nod along and go, of course, people matter most and blah, 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 right? So they all say that. And I'm sure you would say, we would all say that, right? Yeah. Then how do you make it happen? And I think you're hitting on the toughest one of them all, change management. And this is not an easy thing. There's many things that I think have made it complex. You've got different generations of people with all different mental models, of course, of how that's supposed to work. Like you said, Gen Z versus somebody maybe who's a little bit older, Gen X as an example. The way they see the world, very different. The tools that they use, very different as well. So first of all, you got difference in ages, I think, which it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just changes the way that we see the world. You got, I think, now many different modes of working as well, which I think makes things, gives a lot of opportunities, right? You give people the freedom and the accountability to work the way they want. It also presents some real challenges that I don't think we can ignore either, in terms of how do you ensure that everyone is kind of on the same page and focused on the same thing, and the culture that you have. It used to be somewhat a little bit easier, I think, when people would come to various offices around the world, and there's a culture around it, because you usually had a leader in that office or a senior person, and they would live the culture, and that would spread throughout everybody else. Nowadays, with everybody being completely on their own, we have to rethink how we do that. I don't think, again, I'm not trying to say it's impossible, but I think it changes definitely the dynamic. When you have a 23-year-old just sitting at home by themselves in front of a computer all day, how are they supposed to live the culture and understand that in a deep, emotional way, right? It's a very different challenge. So I think you got different ways of working as well. And then you've also got, like, I think, a lot of the styles of how people work as well. Sometimes there are some things where you want a very collaborative, inclusive culture, meaning like it's got to be bottoms up and everyone gets to participate and so on. And then there are some things that should be nearly in some ways non-negotiable, I think. Whereas a little bit, this is what we stand for. These are our values and what we're going for and so on. And maybe that's a little bit more top down. It doesn't mean that you can't have input into that, of course, from everyone, because you should be, I think, as inclusive as possible. But there's some things I also have seen become a disaster if you try to solicit input from everyone and everyone just gets to do what they want. I mean, there's some times where being a little bit top down and saying, this is what we need to do, this is what I expect of you, I think that's okay as well. And I think there's a little bit of like a friction in the culture where when you say that to someone, I expect this of you, I expect you to act this way and so on, people get a little bit offended maybe or triggered because you shouldn't be able to tell that. Well, at the same time, you are working for a company, you're the leader, here's what we expect of you, right? And I think, so you've got so many different dynamics, and all of these things here are tricky things on their own. But when you combine them all, it becomes really tricky to do, of course, right? It becomes really, really tricky. So when it comes to kind of, these are all important aspects of change management. Mm-hmm. What I've come to realize, at least for me, the way I've become successful is, of course, there's really a couple of different things I do when I come into a new company. I've done that many times, as you know. Number one is I try to set a clear and inspiring vision for everyone, because then at least people know what they're working toward. Like I said earlier, I think it's so important to have clarity on what you're working towards so you can wake up every day feeling excited for that. But that's at the highest level. Maybe that's not a goal that inspires everyone. Then the next step after that is you have to get to know every single person in the team as much as you can and understand what drives their motivations, what will drive them towards become a better version of themselves. And think about it. I mean, you and I are probably similar ages, right? Maybe you're a little bit younger than me. I've been around for a long time. I don't know your age, right? But
I don't think so. But
maybe I don't know. But maybe. But your motivation also changes over time. At some point, I wanted to be promoted, and I wanted maybe more salary, and I wanted more responsibility. Now I'm a little bit older. I'm just like, the most important for me is to be around people that I enjoy being around, and seeing the other people around me succeed and grow and so on. But people's motivation are very individual. So unless you can tap into that as well, change management also will sometimes be met with a lot of friction, I think. So for example, if you tie that back to how do you create a great customer-centric organization, of course, again, I think you have to have the vision and the clarity of why this matters for the future success of your business at the highest level. But then when you actually get down to why should it matter to somebody in finance or somebody in legal or somebody in the product team, then you have to understand a little bit of their motivation and get them to understand the importance of their job as it relates to ultimately the idea of delivering an experience that customers fall in love with. Because there are really three aspects. There's three stages of creating, I think, a super brand. Number one is people have to be aware that you exist. Number two, people have to understand what you do. And number three, people have to fall in love with what you do, right? And so think about how many brands that we know out there, companies that we know about them, but we don't really care about them. Okay, that's number one. Number two, okay, we know about the company. We know what they do, and I use it because maybe I have to, but I don't really love it. The third one, the brands that stand the test of time, Airbnb, Patagonia, Nike, BMW, Apple, they have figured out a way for you to fall in love with it. And that's because it's so consistent in the way what they do across every touch point that you have with that company, online, on the phone, with a person, with the product. It's completely holistic, like you said that word earlier. And I think but that requires really a lot of work, and it requires you to be super mindful of how that comes across and everything.
Yeah, and this just reminded me when you said like across touch points and all the journeys and all the interactions really with the company, but also very consistent in time, I think, because everyone can get it well one time, but doing it really well or doing it on a world-class level for like 20 years, 40 years, I don't know, that's very difficult. And I think it also ties really well with what you're doing right now. How do you spread this the learnings of the company right now? How do I make sure they stick within the company? How do I crystallize them in a form that they stay within the company, within everyone within the company 20 years from now? I think that's also a very big part of customer experience, so that everyone kind of the next generation of employees, if you will, they learn the same things. They learn the spirit of it, if you will.
There's a couple of things, right? Number one is when I was working at LinkedIn many years ago, there was a data point that I saw from one of our research studies that said that within 5 years, 90% of all your skills are outdated, which means that if you don't have a learning culture, and there's many ways of learning, right? It could be through a system, it could be through mentorship, it could be through coaching, through classes, whatever. If you don't have a learning culture, you're going to always kind of be not optimized for delivering the best outcomes because skills get outdated. I've spent a lot of my career in marketing, as an example, as a chief marketing officer. And the way you did marketing 5 years ago or 10 years ago is very different than the way you do marketing now. The tools are different, the channels are different, and so on. The way you think about messaging and authenticity. So it's a duty of both the company, but also the individual to keep up to date on the skills. I think super, super important. And that's a mix of, and I'm not trying to say that a platform will solve all this. It's a part of it. Don't get me wrong. You need a good platform to do it, but it's also leadership and culture, motivation, a lot of things that go into that as well. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is we also have to change the way that we think about holding people accountable. I would say one of the key things that I've been asked over the last couple of years. So before I joined Zensai, I was spending a lot of time as an advisor to CEOs and founders around the world on how to optimize their culture and their performance. And the number one question I would say I got is, how do I create a culture of high performance where people are accountable? And so I think one of the challenges we've seen in the world for the last many decades is that we have been chasing growth and profitability and all those kind of things. And those are, of course, important. You will not have a successful company if you don't have growth and profitability. But to me, they are outcomes of you having a culture where people are motivated and doing great work every single day. And we have to then start measuring and holding people accountable to what goes into that, the way they show up every day, are you true to the values? Are you very customer-centric, as an example? Most companies, they have values that they put on their wall, or when you get onboarded or you go through HR, they have values that say, here are 5 values. We're accountable. We act as an owner. We act as a CEO. We take risks and all these kind of things. But then when it comes to actually holding people accountable to them, nobody knows how to do it. And it's because it's not part of the way that you actually reward people, recognize people, maybe even change their salaries and bonuses and so on. So if you have a value that says we want to be customers come first, or we're 100% customer centric in everything that we do, sounds great on a poster, but how do you actually do it? So when it comes to your monthly or quarterly or yearly reviews, I believe until we actually start holding people accountable to those values, then I think you're always going to be chasing the outcome and not the input. Meaning the outcome is, are you growing? Are you profitable? And blah, blah, blah. So again, super important. And this is not an excuse to not have accountability towards those goals, because of course you should have, we're going to grow to 10 million, we're going to grow to 100 million, blah, 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 so on. But the way you get there matters just as much. Right? And I think this is one of the reasons we've gotten to this, I think, a little bit messy world that we're in, where it can feel a little harsh and hard sometimes, where it's like, it's me or my company matters more than anything else, because we're constantly focused on just grow, right? Versus the input that gets into, and I think the new generation, this is what gives me hope. The new generation, I think, care a lot about also the inputs, what goes into it. The way you get there matters just as much as the end destination. That you're showing up every day, and you're collaborating well, you're nice to people, you're treating people well, you're thinking about outcomes and consequences of the environment or people around you and all these. It gives me a lot of hope that it's not just about chasing endless growth and profitability, because that will always be there. That's kind of an easy excuse, but it's also like how you get there matters a lot. And so for this year, I really think when I think about the companies that I've worked for that have done this well, they also reward you or recognize you based on the way you show up every day. It doesn't mean it's easy. Don't get me wrong. It's like, if it was easy, everybody, I think, would do it, right? Show up every day and be yay. But it doesn't change the fact that this is also things you control. I always say to my team, the way you show up every day, and it counts for me as a leader too, we can control that 100%. 100%. It doesn't mean it's easy. Like if my kid is being difficult in the morning, or somebody cuts me off in traffic, or I get a crappy email from a customer, or my boss says something wrong to me, it can all affect my mindset, of course, and the way I show up. It doesn't change the fact, I don't think, that you can still control the way you show up. The moment you walk in the door to the office, the moment you have a customer interaction, it's on you 100%. Right?
It's very interesting how do you differentiate these things. Really, is kind of the super big problem, I think, because I've been thinking about this myself. I have a town hall to lead here in the company and so on, and then in the morning I feel a little bit tired and all that. And I'm like, okay, people don't want to know about the fact that I'm tired. That's not why I'm there. Really, that's not my job at the end of the day. And as leaders, it's sometimes I think very difficult because you are your personality, I think, in a lot of ways at work. So people need to see you as an energetic person and all of these things. Even if you don't feel like this, you need to kind of make yourself do it. How do you do it? Give us tips and tricks on.
Like when you're doing your all hands, as an example, doesn't matter. The team doesn't care that you got 2 hours of sleep last night. I was like, and you were stressed.
Right not to care, right? I mean, it's not their job to care.
Of course, it's not their job. Everyone has their own shit going on, right? Yeah. So of course they do, right? So the way I do it is I always try to remind myself of it. I'm very mindful of the way I show up, the way my energy impacts other people, right? My energy can impact people for good or for bad. If I come in with a bad attitude and I'm kind of pissed off, I can see that everybody gets affected by it. And it's true for everyone, whether you're an individual contributor, a manager, or a senior executive, right? Of course, I would say that as a senior executive, you even have more influence. So it's more important.
You're more visible anyway.
Of course, you're more visible, right? So it's very, very important that the way you show up is very mindful of the way that it impacts other people, because of course it does, right? And you have such an opportunity. I mean, I was speaking to a colleague a while back. It's a different company I was working for, and they were going through some tough times. And I was having a real conversation with that person, because the way that person was showing up every day, I could tell it was very heavy. It was impacting everybody around. And this person was a vice president, so they were a leader. They had a decent sized team. I'm like, and it doesn't mean that you can't, of course, be yourself and authentic. And people go through stuff, and I think people can be very empathetic to that. But of course, there's a fine balance of how that impacts other people around you as well, right? And so I was just having one of those conversations, but it also requires you to really get to know the person and what they're going through and so on, and have that kind of culture where you can have the trust to actually have these conversations. And I think this is also an interesting thing. My experience with, I would say with this kind of online culture that we have now is that you can still actually make that happen. You can still build decent amount of trust. It just takes a little bit longer. Like before we were all kind of working remotely, you would go to like lunch with someone or dinner, and you get to know them a little bit, talk about your families and your aspirations, your dreams, and where you've come from. And nowadays, because I think we get into a mode of everything is just focused on work, you can be hyper efficient, very productive. You lack a little bit of that, I think, human connection, but you can build it. It just takes, to me, I'm not just saying you can't do it, because I think I've done it very successfully with my teams. It just takes a little bit longer, because you also have to really make the focus. Like when I'm meeting my next person, and we're spending 30 minutes, I'm not going to talk about our work. I'm only going to try to talk about stuff. But that's very difficult to do online, because you get into this mode of, let's discuss the project, or something.
You're in front of your laptop and you schedule the meeting.
Exactly.
By design, it's very business.
Exactly. And one-on-one, it's fine. I actually think online, it's a group meetings where it's a little harder to have that connection. Like if you have 7 people in a room, in a real room, there's an energy flow and a connection. You can read people's body language and see their eyes and so on. That's hard if you have 7 people online and they're all like just a tiny dot. One-on-one, I think, is actually perfect. Like I can see your face and your body and all those kind of things. But but it's interesting, because that's, I think, how you build that camaraderie and trust, very much so.
Robin, I'm gonna take I'm gonna go 5 minutes back actually, because you said something super interesting about self-awareness. Just reminding myself that I can be feeling like this, and I need to prevent myself from doing this. And it's very similar to the way I think about in the customer insights world or customer experience analytics world. In a lot of ways, I think of it as providing self-awareness basically for these companies. Because if at work, it's my employees or my colleagues who kind of give me this feedback, again, verbally or with their bodies. I think of customer insights really as this self-awareness mechanism for companies. But at the same time, it's not enough, right? because I remember, I don't remember whom, but I love the quote, if more information was the answer or more knowledge was the answer, we would all be billionaires with perfect apps. We're not. So knowledge is really good and information is really good and self-awareness is good, but you need to act on it, right? So how do you make a company act on these insights? I think that's the other $1 million question, really.
I mean, you're asking some, I think, big existential questions. I totally agree. I've actually also said this to my teams before. It's like, I actually don't need more data. I need more insights. I need more the ideas that come from this here, because I think we are living in a world where there's so much data. And so, yes, of course, sometimes you need more data to make a decision, but oftentimes there's a lot of data out there. So then it becomes what you do with it. A CEO I used to work for, he used to say this thing, the say-do ratio. And I've always kind of kept that in mind, like what you say versus what you do. What is the ratio? And ideally, of course, in an ideal world, it should be 1-to-1, right? To say what you say and what you do. But so if your insights are giving you some information and you're then saying this, are you also doing it? It's basically, I mean, the highest form of commitment is when you're actioning what you're actually saying. But it also comes from, I think, having a culture of courage and leadership that's okay with taking decisions, or even empowering people in various roles to take decisions. So often I see so many companies get really stuck because they feel like nobody's empowered to take the decision, or they need more data, right? At some point, you're going to run out of more to discuss. Like, for example, I used to work at LinkedIn, right? So this is an easy one to pick on. But at this point in time, we were getting a lot of competition from a competitor called Indeed, which is another big job portal out there. Even though LinkedIn, I think in many ways kind of owns the market, of course, for your profile, but even also, but on the job board front, there was a lot of companies out there. There's some global ones and there's also some very local ones, depending on which market you're in. And I remember we had done some really deep analysis over, I think it was about 4 or 5 months, of how they beat us in some markets, what were their key value propositions, drivers, what were they saying in their messaging, what was their product promises, and all kinds of stuff. And I just remember so vividly in this meeting, then was myself and a bunch of other leaders talking about how we're going to fight back and so on. But because we were always hyper cautious and conservative, I think in that forum, the end result was that we said, some leaders said, well, this is good. I think we've got a lot of data, but let's keep looking at it and come back in another 3 to 6 months and see what we should do with some recommendations. I'm just like, okay, the data might not be perfect, but we have enough information right now here to give us, like, let's go fight back now. We're losing deals. We're losing customers to this competitor. And I just like, wow, we move slow. And I feel like, I don't know if it was maybe different priorities, which can be fair, or lack of courage, or to make decisions around like really being aggressive and so on. But I think a lot of times it comes back to, do you have a culture? Again, I think of what is an organization? What is Gemseek? What is Accenture? What is Zensai? We are a collection of people trying to solve challenges. Sometimes these are small and sometimes these are big. But in order to actually solve these challenges, small or big, you have to have somebody at some point making a decision. Sometimes that's an individual contributor. Sometimes that's a manager. Sometimes it's a senior leader, depending on the size and scope of the challenge you have. But at the end of the day, that is what an organization is. And if you have an organization where there's a complacency, it seeps through to everything I think that you do, right? And so it's like I've seen it. And so of course the opposite of a big company is like a startup where you just make a zillion decisions all the time, because that's how you fight for survival. In a big company, once you reach that altitude and growth and stability, then everything becomes a little slower. So how do you mix and match those two, right? I think it comes down to, how do you create a culture and a mindset around this?
That's a very good point. I still remember when you said empowerment, one of the best experiences I've had is like, we're sitting in a restaurant, very small one, nothing fancy, all of that. So a friend of mine asks the waiter for desserts and whether they have desserts without any nuts, because she's allergic. He's like, no, unfortunately, we don't have anything. 5 minutes back, he comes back with a peeled orange. It's obviously not on the menu. It's not something you would sell to a customer. But it's amazing, right?
I love it.
It doesn't cost a thing. And then the surprise with us, it's like, whoa, you did actually an amazing thing, It
was funny when I was the chief marketing officer at a company called WeWork, and when I joined, we were a private company. We were worth about $47 billion. So one of the most highly valued private companies in the world at that point in time. Of course, since then, lots of things have happened. And we were over 10,000 people in the company. So pretty big company as well. And we had maybe about 600-700 locations around the world at the time of these offices that we managed. But one of the things that we did that I absolutely loved is that even no matter who you were, no matter what level of seniority, again, I was the chief marketing officer, so I had a big team and so on, and a global responsibility and a senior leader. We would go to an office and we'd spend 2 days standing behind the reception, servicing customers. And it was so great. I mean, here I was in one of our offices, and you're dealing with all the stuff that a customer needs to be successful. Oh, the printer is not working. The Wi-Fi is not working. The air conditioner is not working. Oh, there's no toilet paper in the bathroom, and it just forces a level of always thinking about what's best for the customers, right? That because how is a senior leader supposed to know all this stuff if you're just sitting in meetings all day and in a conference room and you're so on, right? And this idea of this, like, making it a part of the culture. So I'm a big fan of, no matter what level you are, no matter which department you're in, you should always go talk to customers. I think it's super valuable. No matter what product you have, hear what they have to say, good or bad. I think there's so many people everywhere in every company that are so far removed from customers. It's crazy, right? And especially thinking about the people who are building the products. Of course, it's obvious that sales is on the front line. So is customer success and customer support. They're on the front line. Marketing is close behind, depending on who in marketing you are. But I want even all the people who are building the products, the engineers there, they should be out there talking to customers, right? Get in front of them, hear what they have to say. And then even further, again, finance and operations and HR, they should be out there talking to customers. So everyone should. It gives you a wildly different perspective of what's I remember one of my best experiences I had was I stayed at a Four Seasons a couple of years ago. And I just love their culture because I remember reading about this, that they have such a high level, no matter which Four Seasons you go to in the world. It's like one of the best experiences. But every employee there is empowered to say yes. Doesn't mean they always say yes, but they're empowered to. So if you stop somebody in the hallway and say, hey, even though it's a waiter maybe in the restaurant, say, hey, I need some towels because I'm about to head to the pool. Can you help me? They'll be like, yes, let me see what I can do for you. And it's like, it's like there's never this is not my job, right? Which is like, I think oftentimes it can become this way.
So basically the empowerment to even a little bit break the rules, I think, because I'm going to go exactly the opposite. In a lot of hotels, I'm a very early bird, so I like to wake up so early and so on. And like when I go to have coffee and the breakfast starts at like 7 and I'm there at 10 to 7 and I'm sitting there and I'm like, can I just get a coffee? And they're like, no, we open at 7. And I just want to the coffee machine. I don't want you to do anything. I just want to make 2 steps, click a button, and then I'm out. You're not going to hear from me.
Totally. It's like I have a kid, right? And he's a little bit of a picky eater sometimes. And we go to a restaurant and he's like, you've probably seen it. They have a lunch menu and a dinner menu. And he's like, I want this here. And I'm like, no, can we have this? Oh, it's on the lunch menu, but we're serving dinner. I'm like, but you have the ingredients. It's on your menu. Why can't you? I mean, it's like when you're so rigid, it's like, it makes no sense, right?
I know, right? And I think that's what basically you have been advocating throughout this whole conversation. We cannot be rigid in these things. Change is kind of permanent. As you said, 90% of what you know now, 5 years from now, it's going to be rubbish. So we need to keep learning and we need to keep developing as companies, as individuals. And I truly love that. It's been of my kind of DNA. So I really enjoyed talking to you, Robin. But to listeners who want to learn more about connecting, CX, marketing, customer centricity, but also employee learning, what would you advise them to do? Maybe resources, maybe, I don't know, actions, with whatever you like.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if you're listening and whatever role you're in, go spend more time with your customers. Whatever you're selling, go spend more time. That's my number one advice for really understanding truly the needs of them, because then it'll make you a better employee and a better leader. I can guarantee it. Number two, if you want to connect with me, just go find me on LinkedIn. I'm at Robin Daniels. Very easy to find. I'm usually the first one that comes up there. And number three, if you want to learn more about our platform, go to Zensai.com. That's Zensai.com, and you can just find us there. You can find more information there as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Robin. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights with our listeners. And we'll be back soon with another episode exploring the ever-evolving world of customer experience. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Ivo.